Welcome to the Pitch Sync podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Flutie Davis. Today we have a fun topic. We're going to talk about something that I think keeps a lot of our founders and innovators, sales reps, and some marketing teams up at night when they're getting ready to launch their product. That question is, how do we get the hospitals to buy our product? Today we're going to be focused on the value analysis approval, the VAC committee process. And we have a really awesome guest, the value analysis whisperer, Mark Copeland. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to see you, Stephen. Thanks for having me here, and hopefully I'm mildly entertaining or edutaining, I guess as they call it now.
If it's anything like our pre-call, this is going to be great. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for our audience to hear you. So, Mark, let's just jump right in. You've had a long, impressive career in MedTech and med device. So just walk us through your journey, and then what led you to that area where you're like, you know what, VAC committee, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So I still consider myself sometimes a basketball coach. I was a college basketball coach and wanted to get into, at the time, pharma. Went to work for pharma in sales, and then went into biotech sales and in neuropsych and sleep medicine. And then 20 years ago, so that was 27 years ago. 20 years ago, I wanted to get into med device, particularly in the operating room, and landed a job with a startup, Globus Medical, that was a startup. I mean, like maybe $6 or $7 million
not anymore.
In total revenue. Yeah, no. Now the number 2 spine company in the world, maybe one.
Yeah.
And was with them selling their product for 10 years, and 10 years. And so I've been in. They were a startup. The biotech company I was with was a startup, and I've been with startups ever since then, either as a sales agent, a distributor, or a salesperson for a small organization that we started 10 years ago, 3Team Medical. And we've grown a significant amount. But we're salespeople. I sell into healthcare systems, ambulatory surgery centers, and hospitals. And so I've been in healthcare sales for 27 years. And I joke, I was thinking about this later. I've called on every single specialty except GI. I don't know how GI. So I've called on every type of doctor. It seems like every type of health system, every type of hospital, every type of ambulatory surgery center. And to this day, they fascinate me. So, and we've always been with startups. Some have done really well. Some have, as one of my favorite people, Steve Blank, says, a crater lined with iridium around them. So I've made every mistake, stepped on every landmine, and had a couple of wins along the way.
That's the exciting thing about startups. I mean, you break things, you move fast, there's a lot of innovation going on, and you're not handcuffed by some of the red tape from the big organizations.
Right. And
for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, you asked how I landed in vet. It's the old. There's some are born into it. Some some of them have a value analysis thrust upon us. I was fortunate that I worked in a weird couple of hospitals that really put a value analysis process in on new products sort of before others did. And it was sheerly serendipity. And I sort of had to learn because nobody else in my company was doing it. I was Globus at the time. And I really learned quickly and drew back on some of my Pfizer training on how to sell to committees, some of whom don't know what you're talking about. They don't know the product. They don't know the problem. So, and it was sort of thrust upon me, and I actually kind of enjoy it. For whatever reason, I'm semi-adept at it naturally. And I've just trained for years on it and have gotten really good, thankfully, because health systems have gotten so big that if you can't sell there in a way that they want, it's very difficult to get new products even paid attention to, much less approved. So it was sort of thrust upon me. And instead of fighting it and resisting it, I just sort of embraced it. And fortunately, so
yeah,
I want to make sure I answered your question. Yeah.
Well, appreciate that. So putting your sales hat on for a second, looking back at when you actually were able to embrace what getting good at selling to a committee like that would do. We were sales reps back in the day, so we like competition. Do you think that there was a big difference in your sales versus that accepted and understood, I need to figure out how to get through this committee, versus those sales reps that are like, oh, I'll let my doctor kind of help push through that process.
I mean, look, I did that where it worked too, right? Like where I had a champion, clinical champion is like, I want this, I'll get it. Um, but so I'm not saying, oh no, I had a better way, right? Um, but I saw people who would just say, well, my champion can't get it approved. The people that make these decisions are stupid, or don't care about the patient. And frankly, that's absurd. Of course they do. And what we learned was those folks aren't speaking the language of this other set of decision makers. And you can either make fun of them or you can figure it out. And because when we were startups, like you didn't have a choice. Because if we didn't figure it out, we might not survive, right? And so that's the mother of invention. And so it'd be awesome if doctors or nurses or could just say, you know what, I love this. This is better for patients. I shall have it. Those days don't exist, and it. You've experienced it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you have to, when you're going through that process, you have to find a way to speak to both the clinical
Mm.
side of it, but now you need to find the C suite. Why does it make sense? We have 25 new products coming to market or coming to our hospital. All of them sound great. They're all going to be the next best thing. But what's best for us? So you've got to figure out like the risk analysis, the marketing opportunity. How does this help us bring potentially more patients back into the door and then provide the best care?
Yep. You and I were trained to think like doctors, right? Because that's who we called on. So we're trained to think, understand their algorithm, understand their clinical options, understand all this stuff. And we probably got pretty good at it. But what we now have to do is this is the hard part. We can't give that up. We have to go learn sort of another skill set. And if you most people aren't trained on it. And if you can't talk business, I mean, I was taught this years ago, talk business to clinical and clinical to business, but I've added an addendum to it. I've said, yeah, but we still have to talk business to business and clinical to clinical, right? So you have to still be able to do that, but you have to be able to talk business to the business people because it's a healthcare business. And we all know it, but it's not as hard as people think it is once they say, I want to learn this. It's not that if you can learn type 1 diabetes and insulin and pancreas. And if you can learn that, you can learn the fundamentals of business that will help you get your product approved. You absolutely will. But it's not, we're not, most of us aren't taught this by our companies, so you got better figure it out yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think back on my earliest stages, and I took for a long time for me to understand it. I mean, my first boss told me, "This is not your industry. You need to find somewhere else to go." And that little fire underneath me, where I'm like, "Okay, the clinical conversations are very good, and you need to find a way to be that. I need to be the extension of the team. I need to make sure they trust me." But I figured there are some products that I'm trying to sell that are very high ticketed. Now I have to figure out the financial aspects of it, the business side of it, make sure it makes sense. And Striker, where I worked at the time, actually just was really good about teaching that. The flex financial programs, how to figure out how to bundle. Also looking at Arthrex's model. I mean, they do a great job of it. So understanding
I
the
think
business side of it.
absolutely when you think about, let's just talk about operating rooms for a minute. You're thinking companies like Stryker, Arthrex, Synthase back when it was just Synthase Trauma, right? They were wizards at it because they were trained on it. Intuitive, right? With the Da Vinci. Like if you think that's not a clinical and business sell, you would be misinformed. And that's just the operating room we're talking about. The ER's similar, ICU, like everything is like this, is this way. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing. And but you have to embrace it. And some companies are good at it, some are non-existent. And I think I have found that the ones that are the vast majority are just not very good at it because they've never had to be. It's not that they're not smart enough. Obviously, they are.
Well, let's take a step back for a
Mm.
second. And some of our audience may not know what the VAC process is, what that is. So, can you just give us a really high level overview of what a VAC committee is and kind of what that approval process and then well, like really like you get a product, you have an idea what that whole process is looking like?
Yeah. And so when I talk about a value analysis committee at a hospital or health system, because health system is probably more appropriate now, right? There are still independent hospitals and there's still some decisions made at the hospital level, but it's becoming less and less. The vast majority of them go to the headquarters. or something like that, or regional in HCA's case. And I would also warn people to say ambulatory surgery centers are literally shrinky dink versions of it. They do the same thing. You just, instead of having 14 people in, who meet once a month in 3 different places, they have 4 people whose job it is to do it. And they work with each other every day, but it's the same concept. So if Stephen, my clinical champion, wants this new product, the process is Stephen, the clinician, who either is an employee of the health system or independent but works here, right? Says, I want this, or we should have this. Their job is to submit it and try to get it approved. And then my company answers all the questions on the form. That's the theoretical process. And then this committee, made up of about 8 to 10 different, maybe 12 different departments in a health system, has a chance to weigh in on it. And it's not everybody weighs in on everything, right? So if it's a disposable thing used in the ER, finance may not be roped in and the C-suite might not be roped in, but it's infection prevention, education, the clinical team, finance, supply chain, revenue integrity, which is one I didn't know a couple of years ago. Really, like, they're adding groups to it because these health systems are becoming more sophisticated because they're businesses, right? So what they want to know is, hey, this thing looks fine. I mean, Steve, I kind of get why you like it, but I'm not a doctor, so I don't even understand it. We want to know, why should we pay for this? Can't we just use what we have? What's the right? And so what people are struggling, but it is a submitted to a committee who meets typically once a month, or tries to, and but it's hard for everybody to do it. And I laugh sometimes when companies complain like, hey, they're doing it, and the guy, my Dr. Steven, can't even present. I'm like, well, they don't necessarily schedule the value analysis committee meetings around your guys' operating schedule, I'm sorry to say, because they also see somewhere between 150, 250 new product requests a year, and they bought this robot, they brought this new thing in, and they're trying to make sure it's working, and they're tracking that. So their meetings, we figured out one time, your product, if it gets brought up on the agenda, has about 4 minutes to get their attention and make sense to them, or they just move on, because that's what we all do, right?
Yeah.
So that's the process. And it's flawed, and it's changing, and it didn't even exist 15 years ago for the most part. So I tell people, this is the primordial ooze of value analysis in healthcare. You can look at other industries, they've had it. Home Depot does it. Like, Hershey Chocolate, where I live, does it. They look at things, but healthcare didn't really have to do that. And now with the massive consolidation, they have to do it, and it's slowed it down, and it's made it more complex. And I joke that sometimes it feels like the value analysis is like, it's like the Vatican. Like, are we electing a pope and we're waiting for some color smoke to come up, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah.
And they're fixing it, but it is painful right now if you follow the process that I just described. That's not what we do.
No.
We do it a different way.
Yeah. So 4 minutes.
Does that explain
that was pretty good.
On the agenda. If you get on the agenda. Because for everyone that gets on the agenda, there's probably 5 more that are just like never make it to committee, as they would say, right? Yeah.
So that being said, so I'm a founder. I've got this great new product. I've got maybe this meniscal transplant that actually works and it's doing well and showing pretty good reimbursement opportunities. Yeah. So how do I, as a founder, my sales can make or break? This could be the next round of investment for us. I have 4 minutes to try to get their attention and to try to get approval. How do I overcome the challenges, the obstacles? What's the best way to do that in a 4-minute pitch?
Yeah. First of all, if you're waiting for the 4-minute pitch, you are hoping and praying. You better cross your fingers, your eyes, and your legs, whatever else you want to cross, because you're really sort of hoping to catch lightning in a bottle. That's why all the work has to be done well before that. We have a rule that we don't request that a product doesn't get requested to go onto the committee until we already think it's going to be approved. To do that, you have to do a bunch of work up front. But what you basically need to do is you need to give it to them in an executive business summary, which most people are familiar with, but aren't used to presenting to committees that way. And I guarantee you, your clinical champions are not. Like they have no idea what you're talking about. It's not what they're trained on. Number two, and this is what I tell everybody, the health system doesn't care about your product. No offense. Like it could be a time machine and they still want to know what it costs. Do we have to plug it into a 220? They don't, it's not they don't care, but like it doesn't make any sense to them. What they want to know is what problem do we have? And so like when you come to meetings and you got 4 minutes and I say, my clinical champion says, hey, we've identified a problem. We're spending this amount of time and this amount of money doing blank, blank, blank with these. And then we have patients coming back in 5 months and their meniscal tear isn't healing. And now they're complaining. And now they're going to the system across town. And now we have to do revisions. And it doubles the time when the OR we think we have to block it off. And they're like, oh my God, this sounds awful. You're like, yeah, I identified something that will help us eliminate 80% of that. Right. And then you're like, and we'll also have improved patient satisfaction score, blah, blah. And then the executive team or the decision maker, who oftentimes is the VP, not the C-suite, is like, we should do this. We should probably be looking at this. Right. And they'll ask a couple questions. Is there any other kind of meniscal system that we could use that we already have as a vendor? Right. Like, but I came in and told them, we have a problem. You would not be aware of it. You don't live this every day. But let me tell you what the problem is. Here's what it's costing us. Here are the downstream issues. You notice I didn't mention your meniscal repair product, like, because they don't care. They want to know what problem does it solve. And if you deliver it that way, your 4 minute, you got a shot, Roger Bannister. You got a shot now, right? Much better than you did if you didn't do that. But if you just come and go, hey, we have this cool new meniscal repair system. It's awesome. It's better for patients. They're like, I don't even know what a meniscus is. Right? Like,
and why is it better for patients? Yeah.
And then the surgeon comes out and is like, oh, bean counters wouldn't approve it, jerks. And you're like, what'd you say to him? Like you're laughing. You know that's exactly how it goes.
It's so true.
And it's so not true. And it's not because people don't care about patients, and it's not because surgeons aren't smart or whomever. They're way smart. But it's like they're speaking different dialects of the same language, Yeah. And so that's what I end up being as a Rosetta Stone, saying like, we're not going to do this. We're going to, before we ever ask to submit this, we're going to know what problem we solve. And we're going to describe it, and we're going to know how much it costs. We're going to know how much pain it's causing and what jeopardy it's putting us in from a risk analysis. Does Joint Commission get us in trouble, or DNV? Is the State Department of Health going to come in here? Because a lot of the clinicians are like, I'm afraid this is going to happen. And you're like, well, did you tell them that? Well, no, I didn't want to scare them.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah. It's challenging.
It's okay, but that's not the way they were trained to think, right? Like, it's really, I think in 10 years, we're all going to be selling this way. I swear to you, I just think some of us happen to be ahead of others, but it's not because it's difficult. So if you're a founder, you want to know, you want clinical benefit, massive clinical benefit if possible, but you want to understand the business case. And the business case is based on strategy. Like what wins does the health system mean? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you do something right now and you have a better surgery on them, but in a year, patients aren't having problems, how would the health system possibly know? But if you're saying, no, we have this, people are coming back, and now our patient satisfaction scores are going down, it reflects poorly on us. Okay, hold on now. We need, like the health system's going, hold on. Say that again. We need to know a little bit about this. That's how you win. It's, that's how you pitch to them. That's how you pitch to the C-suite in any other business. It's exactly how you do it. So, yeah.
We talked about founders. You said founders, and you talked about strategy, getting ready to go. If you're waiting for that 4 minutes, you're done. You're not getting that. So can you speak a little bit about, as a founder and you're getting ready to commercialize your product, talk about the strategy ahead of time. Like, does it make better sense to come to you earlier or try to go out and do it on your own? Like, what's the strategy behind this? And then part two to that question, now we're ready to actually go to that committee, the strategy behind actually getting some champions and some groundswell movement behind that.
Yeah. So the first part you said was when should they be thinking?
Should they engage with you, essentially, someone like yourself?
Well, probably the earlier the better, because it's almost like saying, hey, it's like, when do you start talking to your person who helps you get FDA clearance for your product? I don't know, but you probably, the sooner you do it, the better, because you don't waste as much money. And I would say value analysis and these decisions are a little bit like that. The more you know early on, the smarter you are, the more prepared you are. And I have found that when you're aware that, like, if you say, hey, we think we're faster than our competitors that are currently there, or their process, what you find is, okay, time it. Like, when you're doing these with your KOLs or your whomever, don't just say, hey, they loved it. They loved the product. Say, like, and we timed that we're 14 minutes faster on average than this, because you're now starting to make a business case that you can turn into dollars, because every minute counts, right? So if you know what matters to health systems and hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers a little bit upfront, you may find that you're skipping. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, I wish we tracked that, because we know we're faster. We just didn't document it. So you almost sort of like pick up some benefits that you wouldn't have paid attention to if you didn't know what to look for, right? So I kind of think of it that way: is how do I write a better 5K submission? Um, it's sort of like, what should I be thinking about beforehand? And then and so I always urge people, you have a panel of KOLs. Let's say you got 10 of them. I would say go to 9 and bring in somebody who makes these decisions for health systems or hospitals or ambulatory surgery, wherever you think you're going to be used. Bring them in and just ask them all your dumb questions. They're not going to make fun of you. They're going to answer them. And now you're forewarned. You don't need me to do it, although I can do it for you. But you want to be forewarned. And they'll tell you everything. And it's not complicated. But I urge everybody, do you bring surgeons into your national sales meeting? Oh my gosh, yes. Or like, do you bring doctors? Oh golly, yeah, yeah. And you're like, yeah, and they put up a bunch of X-rays and MRIs, and they talk about patients. You're like, woo, that's really cool, right? And everybody, they celebrate some, woo, right? What if you brought some of these people in and let them tell you what they're dealing with and what they want out of their vendors and what they wish their vendors brought to them? I'll bet you'd learn stuff, right? And you'd be better off. So I always think that is super important, is to get those people in the building. I can tell you what they're going to say, and I'm glad to help. And it might be easier, but boy, there's nothing like it coming from the horse's mouth. That's part one of that. And your second question was, because you hit me with two good ones, and I'm only so smart. What was the?
So it's part two. So the founders have already come, the company's already come and talked to you about strategy. Now you have to put together the strategy for that health system. How do you get that groundswell movement ready to go and try to get as much ammo behind you to try to get an approval?
I find it's two parts. The more clinicians that support it, it's one of the first questions you'll get. Well, who in this place wants this product other than Dr. Steven, right? So you want to try to get as many as you can. And or at least that say, I would use it if it were approved. And I'd keep a list. And if they're a health system of 10 hospitals, and of which your whatever is done at all 10 of them, I'd want people from all 10 hospitals. You can understand how this is a lot of work, right? But you want to sell to a 10 hospital health system, you have to go sell to a hospital health system. I think that's really important. And then asking the questions. I'll give you an example. If my thing works faster, I'm going to be asking the people in the hospital, hey, like, I know that, like, getting folks out of the hospital a day earlier, length of stay is a big, important, red blinking thing in every health system. We think we get your patients out 14 hours faster, but like, would that even be important? And the people you're talking to tend to be the people who have a boot in the clinical camp and a boot in the business camp. So they often are directors. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, well, how important? Like, is there, like, is that money? Like, do you pay, and they start to tell you, no, we get another patient in the room. We're using the rooms more often. We're getting people out of the hospital sooner. Like, it goes against our bundled. It's one of our quality metrics. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know any of this. Right. And so when you learn all those things, you're finding out they're telling you everything because they want better products for their patients. But uh, that's the part I think you learn is what do we think we do well? And let me put a number on it. So do we save 10 minutes in the operating room? All right, that's $50 a minute. That's $500 a minute. And they're like, actually, it's more like in this place, $95 a minute. You're like, okay, cool. So now I just became more valuable, right? So, but you got to ask those questions. And that's why then when you go in and when your clinical champion talks about the problem, they have all that information. You do a pro forma and you do a business analysis, a simple one for them, and it ends up adding up really fast. And the health system, there's no way they could possibly know it. Everybody's so siloed anyway. How would they know? You got to do it for them. Right? Does that make sense? So when you're
Ouch.
building groundswell, you want just not just doctors, you want a business part of it. And I guarantee you, you probably have a good business case. You just have to help them make it because no one there is going to do it. It's very rare that anybody there is going to do it for you. Very rare.
Yeah. And well, like you said, so you talked about building a good groundswell, and you said the doctors want to know, well, sorry, the hospital wants to know what doctors are using it, and try to figure that. Same thing when you're selling a product and you got a new one coming out. You go to physician and, well, who else is using it? What other facilities are
Yeah.
using it?
Yeah.
So it's the
Exactly
same
the same.
concept. So yeah. So
Same,
strategy
same
is
concept.
big. Yeah,
Yep.
strategy is big in making sure you're getting the right messaging behind that and the right groundswell, the right people behind you. Now, how do I package
Yeah.
that together to present to someone?
Yeah. It's pretty simple. I have found. The hard part is getting that groundswell and getting that information back from them and them telling me how painful the problem is. I want them telling me how expensive it is and how much pain it causes, how many staff they have to waste time screwing around with whatever it is, right? And and then I put all that together and synthesize it and go back to them and say, I think you're spending this much money on it. And they're like, really? Where'd you come up with it? I'm like, here. And I've done a simple pro forma. We're not doing Harvard Business Reviews. It's not what we're doing, right? We are doing a simple cost analysis. And then we go back to all of our champions and say, check this out. This is what I came up with. And they're like, wow, I actually think it's more. Whoa, I didn't know it was that much. And I think and now all of a sudden they start to go, this is a really good decision for this health system, not just me. Um, if you do that, it's a like you got to keep going back. There's not like one done. You get groundswell, you get business, and then you put it in an executive business summary and you let them present it. Now we can't write these things for these folks, as far as everyone knows, but like I'm going to put a format together and I'm going to tell them here's the here are the numbers. And here's what people in like the VPs and directors say to me. Hey, can you send me that? Can you send me that pro forma you did in that executive business summary? Because I'm going to get this thing approved because we need to do this. And that's who gets it approved in value analysis committees. It's the directors and VPs because they're the ones who have a boot in both camps. And now you're talking their language. But you have to go in, you have to embed in these places. It's not easy. And that's what founders are going to end up having to do. They have to. You can't get you will not be able to get evaluations. You can't just come and say, hey, we have a reimbursement code and we think we're $10 cheaper than Steve's thing. So can we try it? They're like, no. No. Who are you? We don't even know what you are. Why do we care about $10 cheaper? Like what are you, nuts? Yeah, it happens all the time.
Before founders, they're doing a lot of this in their early stage. They're gathering a lot of this information. What's the best piece of advice you can give to them while you're still in the product development stage, but you're working with your KOLs and you understand and identified these are my launch sites based off the physicians we're working with? So, how do I essentially make this more of an efficient process and start to gather that information so we can start to get a good message behind that and then tailoring that message to the C suite? Now, we know what we're doing, we're tailoring this to the physician at this point, then taking that to put to the people that are actually making those decisions.
So use your KOLs. This is what I would urge. And look, there may be a better way to do it, but I can tell you this is what I do and this works. Is I'm talking to my KOLs and they're like, hey, this is going to be cool. You're still in that early development side. Say, let me ask you something. Who at your health system is the one who comes in and says, you're not doing enough or you need to do more or this is great numbers? Who's coming in and talking to you about clinical and numbers and business? Who is that? Would you introduce me to them and tell them, I just want to understand what moves the needle there, what matters to them, because we're still in development. We're not even ready, right? Like, so there's no way I can sell because they're going to think, oh my gosh, some guy's coming in to sell me something. Like, I can't sell you anything. Even if you love this thing, I can't deliver it because we're still in development. But what I'm trying to do is understand the lay of the land, what matters to you guys. And then they will tell you what matters because that's their job. And I think that now all of a sudden you're like, well, we're designing this thing or we're late stage and we think we're going to have approval next year. Would this make sense? Would this, if I walked in today and I said this to you, would that matter and why? Now that's not easy for people who aren't in sales, right? Is to sit there and then listen to whatever they say and not argue with them. And just because you're doing reconnaissance, you're not doing sales. And you are doing, I'm getting the lay of the land so that when I come back in here, when they finally have that product done, I know exactly what to say because they told me what to say. They told me what matters. And then I'm turning around saying, hey, Steven, you got to bring this thing with this. Like, we got to measure this because they just told me everything. But if you're the founder, you got to be willing to go do that. But and the KOLs will help you. They'll say, oh yeah, go talk to the ASC administrator. Tanya will tell you everything. And you sit in with Tanya. And trust me, Tanya knows everything. Tanya will tell you everything. And you'll walk out of there and go, I had no idea. Tanya, we should have had Tanya at our meetings. And I'm like, well, that's what Copeland said on that podcast.
Yeah. That great podcast. So start the process early. That's what we're saying is start early so you can start really optimize again. Early stage companies, limited resources, start putting the processes in place to gather the information early, build the relationship, the power of relationships as you're getting ready to launch. Next thing you know, that wall is a little lower, the barrier is a little easier to get into.
It's lower. And you're much more in tune with them, and they are way more in tune with you because they know you came in and took the time and tried to understand. And that is incredibly important in this. But here's the cool part. You'll find then what they tell you probably has application just about everywhere because that's where healthcare is right now. Everybody has the same set of problems, it seems like, for the most part. And it's good to do a science experiment and talk to a couple of them in different places to make sure. But what you're going to find is that what Tanya, in this example, tells you will work at most of those places in some way, shape, or form because they're all struggling with the same things. That is a bit of a benefit, right? That there's a lot of homogeny. Like, there's just a lot of the sameness across these places right now, sadly, because they're all struggling with the same things.
We could even take what Tanya is telling us and then build a good marketing strategy behind it as well. Okay, well, this is voice of customer, KOL side, the clinical side, but also this is now what we know is important for the next system and build a good marketing strategy. So trying to use all of this as much as you can to build a good go-to-market strategy.
And sometimes people think I'm crazy, but like when I go to AORN or when I go to SPA, the big sterile processing meetings, I don't go to sell a product. I go to just shut up and listen and ask people, hey, do you guys deal with this? You deal with this? And you find out like everybody has the same problems. And then you're saying, okay, this informs me. Like when I bring this thing out or when I come talk to them, they've told me all about it. And I asked them more. And that's amazing. I sat at AORN last year to lunch, and I got a guy who runs a VA in Alabama, two people who run a big teaching institution in Iowa, and somebody who ran a 10 OR place in Connecticut. Could not have been more opposite. Like different parts of the country. And I sat there and asked them the question. They're like, oh yeah, we have this, same stuff, same problems. Like it's crazy, but that's where healthcare is. You can solve one place's problems, you're probably able to multiply, right?
Great advice.
That which is helpful. That's a way to grow your business.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. Well, Mark, that actually brings us to the end of our podcast, really. And I want to thank you for being here. I mean, this has been unbelievable content, unbelievable information. I mean, what I'm getting out of this, start early. And if you can give that one piece of advice, would it be start early, gather the content? What would that be, that final piece, really?
I would say I've learned to say this to folks. You're going to say your clinical story. You're killing it at the clinical story. You're brilliant at it, probably. Think like a business person and say, what would a business person want to see who doesn't understand this, but has to make business decisions? It's really that, oftentimes it's that simple. But if you're not sure, go talk to some of the business people, just like you go talk to your KOLs and ask them these questions, same exact thing. But if you think like a business person, you're already multiple steps closer to it. And it's really not more complicated than that, which I think makes it easier for people, right? Because it's hard what you guys do, founders. That's difficult. I don't know how some of them do it. I'm fascinated by it, but this is something they'll run into that I have some expertise in, and experience, which is helpful too. So,
Well, you are the value analysis whisperer, and we're so happy that you were able to join us. And
I
then,
was
as
dubbed
a
that
fellow,
by somebody else, by the way. I was called that by a surgeon 8 years ago, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds kind of cool. I'm gonna say that now,
stick
but
with
I'm not
it.
smart enough to
It's
come up with it."
it,
Yeah.
it's marketing. It's marketing. I love it. Well, look, as a founder, for those founders that are looking for resources like Mark, that's what PitchLink is, and we really invite you all to come check out our platform. And for the community that we want to build, Hive is where you also can come and connect with other fellow founders that are going through the similar issues and meet people like Mark. So we really appreciate you being here, and please follow the podcast and like for more engagement. And thanks for joining everyone.